happiness is a funny thing, right? I mean, stick with me on this one because happiness is something that is an odd paradox. So, and what I mean by that is we chase after it constantly and we never really seem to have it officially, right? It's like we're almost in America, think about it. We're almost born with this idea that we're entitled to happiness, that we deserve happiness, and that happiness is something that we should always be experiencing really all the time, that we should just kind of be living in a state of happiness. Now, I'm linking an article that I read that was really helpful for me on this. A guy named Tim Elmore wrote this, and he's really kind of poking at this idea of us, I guess, on our relationship with happiness. And I'm doing a series in November called Not Satisfied, and we're going to be looking at the book of Philippians. And so I encourage you to read that book in the New Testament. It's written by a guy who's in prison, and the focus really is on how joyful he is and how glad he is. But the question is, where does that joy come from, right? Because think in our own country, we have as just a foundational principle as Americans, we have life, liberty, and go ahead and finish it. Right. Pursuit of happiness. Isn't it interesting that they said it that way? The pursuit of happiness. And happiness is such an elusive thing. It's like we are pursuing something like we're trying to catch the wind, right? And Ecclesiastes talks a lot about that in the Old Testament. Now, in this article that Tim Elmore wrote, he's kind of like a social scientist of sort. You know, he's not really a philosopher, but he's a guy that pays attention to culture, and particularly pays attention to younger people, those that are like in the 35 and younger demographic, and what makes them tick, and, you know, how do they see the world around them. And he makes a pretty good case in this article that we've linked to, that when you grow up in a world that says you're entitled to happiness and that you should expect happiness, that is going to make you a very, very selfish person, right? Because if that is your understanding about the world around you, you're not only going to be really selfish, but you're also actually going to be pretty depressed, right? Isn't that odd? That if happiness is the end game for us, that means that we are pursuing something that we'll never get, which leads to a sense of having no direction, and no purpose, and no meaning, and really no satisfaction. Because even when we get it, right? We get that girl, we get that guy, we get that job, that car, that house, right? That watch, right? That piece of clothing, the status, the promotion, that grade, we get into that college, we get, you know, whatever it is, right? All of these things we think are going to make us happy. But oftentimes they can really just end up bringing more drama into our life, more worry into our life. We stack up and pile up things because we think that they'll make us happy, but then we have to maintain those things, right? We have to watch out for those things. We have to keep those things clean. We have to move them around because we have too much stuff, right? And so again, in this article, I think he does a really good job of saying, okay, well, if we're not going to be happy just by pursuing things, we're not going to be happy pursuing stuff that makes us happy, then what is it? And I'm curious, what do you think it is? Right? If you look at your life objectively, if you were able to step back and look at your life and say, okay, the things that I have in my life, do they ultimately give me happiness? Right? How about your kids? Do you look to them for happiness? What about a spouse? Right? Or a significant other? How about right behind me, right? Cars. Do we look to those things that we have to provide happiness? And do they provide that? Because I would wager that if you expect your kids and or spouse and or another person in a relationship to bring you happiness, you have probably been sorely, sorely disappointed, right, in those things. And that fresh car smell, right, when you buy it and it's like, oh yes, and then the first time something happens, right, you hear a clink, or you have to take it into the shop, or you have to do whatever, and it's like, ugh, right, you got to clean the thing, right? I mean, no matter what it is, these things ultimately don't bring us happiness. So again, objectively thinking, like, what do you think will make us happy? That is $1 million question, isn't it? And what Tim Elmore proposes is that it's by actually focusing outward that we will find the most satisfaction and the most happiness. Because here's what he argues in this article, and I love it. He said, happiness shouldn't be a destination, right? We shouldn't be trying to get to happiness. We should understand that happiness is a part of the journey. Like, we need to be able to find happiness and contentment taking everyday steps, right? Living life out, finding the joy around us, and realizing that happiness must be a part of the journey, not the destination. And I know that can sound trite and that can sound silly, but I think that the more you're able to say no to those temporary happiness things, the more you're going to realize that you do have less stress, because you're not spending your money as much on stuff. You're not spending your emotional energy on as much on things that you shouldn't. And you're not giving as much of your time to things that really aren't fulfilling you, really aren't making you happy. And then you're not always looking to something else to provide that happiness, right? In a very real sense, I think you're able to slow down and say, okay, where's my happiness in the journey? Where's my joy? And as a follower of Christ, like, that is the difference maker, of being able to say, I know that I have joy in the midst of all of this. I know I have purpose and meaning and value, and I have hope in the midst of this. I can look around a community. I can look around in my life, and I'm just aware of the blessings in my life. But again, that point of service toward others, so that try this sometime. Try, being able to pour into somebody else, and try being able to invest in someone else. Try having that attitude of humility toward other people. And I think you see, by helping others, by pouring into others, by being less judgmental of others, by being more forgiving of others, right? All that stuff is very other focused. And I think what you'll see is more contentment grow in your heart, right? Because it's not about just me. It's not about just us, right? Because I honestly don't believe that we can carry the weight of being the center of the universe, right? But everything in our culture tells us that you are the center of the universe, or that I'm the center of the universe, and my happiness is the most important thing. But what happens if somebody does something that makes me unhappy? Well, man, that's attacking me, right? And then we get buried under the weight of making everything about us. And only the creator of the universe can carry that kind of weight, right? And I think that's a big part of satisfaction, to say, you know what? I am not the center of the universe. I can't be. I can't carry that weight. And when I make everything about me, about my happiness, about my opinion, my point of view, man, it's like we are crushing ourselves, right? So take that this week. Really think practically. I think this is like a super practical idea, and it's one we're going to spend a whole entire month on in November. I mean, it's Thanksgiving month, right? And how can we go from being not satisfied, because we're a very unsatisfied culture, how can we go from that to being satisfied? We have everything we could need in this country, plus, right? And yet, study after study, survey after survey, year after year, says that we are the most depressed people ever. Isn't that odd? I mean, more so than any other country, right? It's like we're always the leading edge of being depressed, and yet we have everything. And yet we're the most educated, but we're driven by our feelings still. We're driven by our happiness still. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Tim Elmore argues it would have been better to say life, liberty, and the pursuit of meaning. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of purpose, right? Think about how differently we would think if that was foundational to who we are as a country. Think about how differently or different things could be for you if that was foundational to who you are, right? Our pursuit is not happiness, right? That's not where we are. That's not who we should be as followers of Christ, especially if you're watching this and you're a Jesus follower. Like, our pursuit is to be like Jesus. And what was Jesus like? He spoke truth. He spoke love, and he was humble, and he focused on other people. Man, stay humble, follow Jesus. You know what I'm talking about? So again, as always, we want to mention we do these to try to be really, really practical, try to provide some insights and resources from different voices and different places, try to bring scripture into real life and to show you how the Bible and the gospel of Jesus Christ can really impact your life in meaningful ways. So if you like this, or it encouraged you or challenged you, we would love if you liked it and shared it. That is a great way to be able to spread this, to help us out, to reach people with a practical message of the gospel and how it affects their life. But thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you either Sunday or we'll see you on Wednesday.